Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to talk about how something special could happen for Metroid's 40th anniversary. And let me just make myself clear here. I'm not promising for sure there's going to be something happening for Metroid's 40th anniversary, but there is a lot of potential here. Nintendo has several options, and considering everything that's been happening, I would say that this is the most likely time for Nintendo to ever celebrate Metroid's anniversary in any kind of big way for several reasons. And there's a few different ways they could go about doing that when thinking about different games or updates they could put out. And so that's what I want to dive into today. Before going forward though, let me simply point out I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers and we're getting oh so close, hopefully hitting the goal soon. So if you find yourself enjoying my videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate you subscribing. So the very first Metroid game came out for the Nintendo Entertainment System back on August 6th, 1986. So this early August, in just a few short weeks here, we will see Metroid's 40th anniversary. The series will have been around for 40 years. And we've seen that Nintendo has been celebrating a few different anniversaries. You look at Mario, you look at Pokemon, even though it's handled a little bit differently, and even Zelda. Clearly Nintendo has plans for that as well, and they've been celebrating Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda every 5 years in a big way for a few generations now. And I'm not going to sit here and act like Nintendo is going to do this for all their different IP like Fire Emblem, Splatoon, Animal Crossing. There's so many where they could theoretically celebrate their anniversaries, but we don't really see Nintendo do that. So why would Nintendo do that for Metroid? Well, Metroid's a very big part of Nintendo's history. Metroid, alongside Mario and Zelda, was one of Nintendo's first big efforts in creating an adventure title, and the original Metroid sort of bridged the gameplay styles between Mario and Zelda. There's even a little bit of a connection when considering the naming scheme. The Legend of Zelda is named after the princess you save, and Metroid is named after the enemy you hunt. And so the point is here, Metroid is an important part to Nintendo's history. But I agree that alone wouldn't necessarily be enough for Nintendo to do something really big for Metroid's 40th anniversary. And I'm not necessarily thinking here Nintendo's going to announce a Metroid 40th Anniversary Direct with several announcements like they would for Mario or what I think they're going to do for Zelda later this year. But I do think there's a lot of reason this time to do something. First of all, we've seen Nintendo really dive into their cross-promotional strategies between putting out the games and the movies, the Universal Parks, and allowing all these different efforts to cross-promote each other, building up the popularity of each of their IP. I do think eventually Metroid is going to figure into this. Yes, there are rumors for a Metroid movie, we'll see if those ever pan out. But when you see Nintendo branching out to Donkey Kong, Pikmin, and Star Fox, and not just Mario and Zelda, I think it's becoming clear that Nintendo has a bigger plan here. And I do think eventually Metroid will be a part of that, especially considering its history. But I wouldn't be putting out this video if it was for just that information alone. There's a little bit more to this. The biggest thing is that there is reason to think that Nintendo could put out something Metroid relatively soon. We do have the Metroid Ravenous leak. Now, Metroid Ravenous is the name that we've seen in a leak from the Brazilian government where Nintendo of America officially submitted for a rating in that country for Metroid Ravenous. And just judging by the name, it's pretty obvious that this is going to be the next brand new 2D Metroid game, a follow-up to Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread was the 5th mainline 2D Metroid game, Metroid Ravenous appears to be the 6th, and it's likely in development by Mercury Steam, the team that made Metroid Dread and also Metroid Samus Returns. Considering how successful Metroid Dread is, this has been kind of a given for some time, but what's exciting about this leak is that we have a name, and it's indicative that Mercury Steam is likely pretty close to completing this game because there's already content to submit for a rating here. And with this in mind, Nintendo could announce Metroid Ravenous at any point. And when we consider what Nintendo did earlier this year with Star Fox, where they didn't announce the game was even coming out until early May and it came out late June, Nintendo could have a really quick turnaround here and announce Metroid Ravenous with it to come out very soon. They could perhaps even use Metroid's 40th anniversary as a way to further promote this announcement. That is a possibility. Now, do I think it's a likely possibility? My first thought on this is that Metroid Ravenous wouldn't be coming out until next year. But I will acknowledge, when considering the slate of games Nintendo has currently announced for this year, all we have is 4, and when looking at the last few years, that's actually a very light number. It's less than prior years. Now, the games that are coming are big games. Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, Nintendo Switch Sports Resort, The Dustbloods, and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time remake. Those are all big titles, And so maybe you could look at it from that perspective and think Nintendo doesn't need anything more. However, I still think there's room for more. History suggests there could be room for more. Not to mention, there's still some debate if the Dust Bloods is going to make it out this year. And so if the Dust Bloods doesn't even make it out this year, then that already light number of 4 becomes even lighter and looks really weird in comparison to prior years, in terms of the quantity of games we see come out in the last 5 months of the year. And so I have been in the frame of mind that Nintendo may be making some announcements here that will have a quick turnaround to bolster up their lineup for the second half of 2026. I'm not saying that Nintendo's going to announce like something incredibly huge, but given what they did with Star Fox and given what we understand about where Metroid Ravenous is at, I don't think it's totally out of the question. Where I find myself leaning though, in terms of what Nintendo would more likely use to celebrate Metroid's 40th anniversary, could maybe be this rumored Super Metroid remake, which by the way, once we heard of Metroid Ravenous, there were others that came out to corroborate this information and suggested that another Metroid would be coming out, such as Andy Robinson from Video Games Chronicle. And this Super Metroid remake has been rumored for some time. The originator of the rumor comes from a YouTube commenter, but what's fascinating about this is that this commenter leaked a variety of things before Nate DeHate or Nash Weedle, which were then later confirmed with the Star Fox Direct and then the June Nintendo Direct, and even mentioned some other things that have now been supported now that we have the leak of Metroid Ravenous. And so this rumor of a Super Metroid remake that's pixel-based is actually looking pretty likely compared to most rumors, and this commenter isn't the only person that has put out this information. There are others, such as Nash Weedle, for example. And Nate DeHate, while not being one who has said that they personally heard it, has talked about it and has not shut it down as something that has been heard, so I do find that curious as well. And something like a Super Metroid remake that's pixel-based, in other words, it's not going to have the fully fleshed out 3D, 2.5D kind of visuals like Metroid Dread and be a super ambitious title for that style of gameplay. In other words, a quicker turnaround in terms of development time, and likely also maybe being the kind of game that Nintendo might even be willing to shadow drop to celebrate Metroid's 40th anniversary, a remake of Super Metroid, one of the greatest games ever made, and a game that's very important to Metroid's history. I think it would be an ideal game to celebrate the anniversary, an opportunity to tell more people about the Metroid franchise, keep up that Metroid momentum, a release not too long after Metroid Prime 4, and set things up well for a big Metroid Ravenous release in 2027. To me, this makes a lot of sense. Now, there's no guarantees. There are some rumors about the Super Metroid remake that suggest it's coming out soon, and there are others that are suggesting that it may take a while. So we shall see, but if it's a pixel-based 2D Metroid, how long could it realistically take? So if I had to pick something that's coming out next month to celebrate Metroid's 40th anniversary, if we're going to get anything at all, it would be this rumored Super Metroid remake. But what's interesting is that Nintendo does not have to stop there. They could do more. I think someday Nintendo could remaster Metroid Other M. I'm not saying that's like a likelihood, I'm just putting it out there as a random idea. But what is likely is perhaps like a Nintendo Switch 2 edition for Metroid Prime Remastered. That's a game that looks beautiful on Switch 1, one of the best looking, best running games on the console, and considering they already have a Switch 2 edition of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, I would love to see a Switch 2 edition for Metroid Prime 1 with mouse controls, with a 4K resolution, perhaps even a 120 FPS mode. I don't think this would be like a really big deal Switch 2 edition, it'd be one of those cheaper ones, kind of like Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, but still something they could also announce to help celebrate Metroid's 40th anniversary. Now on the note of Metroid Prime 1 Remastered, what about Metroid Primes 2 and 3? Now retired Metroid Prime producer Kensuke Tanabe, in the visual retrospective they put out in lead up to Metroid Prime 4, did make mention they would like to see Metroid Prime 2 get a remake or a remastering eventually. And so from that perspective, there is some room for optimism here. And I do think eventually Nintendo would like to do that, but considering what they did with Metroid Prime 1 Remastered, I wouldn't expect them to just shadow drop Metroid Prime 2 out of nowhere like that. However, I do think it's also worth noting that Nintendo did shadow drop Metroid Prime 1 Remastered out of nowhere, seemingly as well. There was a Nintendo Direct early in the year of 2023, and they just announced it and shadow dropped it in that same day. So if we're talking about shadow drop potential here, there is a history there. So that is also a possibility that I don't think we should completely overlook. Now, do I think that's likely? I do not think that's likely. And I definitely doubt that they would do that and also shadow drop a Super Metroid remake. But I'm just talking about how I don't think this is completely out of the question. Now, something else I'll put out there as another interesting possibility if Nintendo wanted to announce something special for Metroid here that wouldn't be too difficult would be some kind of update to Metroid Prime 4, probably some sort of free update just to get people to go back and play the game. Nintendo has done this for a variety of their series here. Even games that you think Nintendo's totally done with, they just randomly announce some sort of free DLC update for. So they could do that for Metroid Prime 4. Do I think they will? No, I'm not expecting any updates for Metroid Prime 4. The main point being here, though, is that Nintendo does have options here to put out some kind of Metroid content to celebrate Metroid's 40th anniversary. But the main thing is, I think there's something going on with 2D Metroid, and August is interestingly missing some kind of release from Nintendo. And they don't have that many releases set for this year, so I am looking at it and thinking, there's gotta be something. And if I had to guess anything, I feel like something Metroid might make the most sense. Of course, Nintendo could probably announce another random Switch 2 edition, like maybe like a Pikmin 4 Switch 2 edition, which has been rumored to come out at some point this summer. August is still technically summer. Nintendo could do that as well. But I love the Metroid series, and I love the idea of Nintendo keeping up the momentum here, not giving up on the IP, continuing to build it. I think that's what's most important for the series right now. Not to give up or move on, but to continue on. But what do you all think? Do you think it's possible Nintendo could do something for Metroid's 40th anniversary? Or is this all just hopium? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.